early pre-memory get hardwired into the baby, child, adult.
Hi, Matt.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
You are a coach, right? Or you
I
have,
am a coach, consultant, and a variety of things. Real estate investor, uh, human.
okay. So why can't a coach just advise their client to use grit or have a growth mindset?
That's a great question. So it's my firm belief that if we already have the belief that we can accomplish something, we'll have the grit inherent in us. We will be able to, I'll just say, apply the growth mindset, but more specifically, we'll be able to learn what we need to do. We'll be able to grasp the belief. The reason we don't have those sorts of beliefs, and I'm talking to a specific subset of people, but I think that's actually most people, is that we have some sort of trauma in our background that's created an element of fear. It's possibly a fear of rejection, not being good enough, a fear of something along those lines. And because of that fear, we have some sense that we're we're going to fail at it. That pretty much strips away our ability to apply grit. The other aspect of it is when we put ourselves into that situation where the grit is needed, we're actually seeing it as a repeat of our recent trauma or previous trauma. And that's putting us in a physical uh, fight or flight response. And I'll expand that: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, which keeps us from applying that grit, particularly the freeze response, which is really common among people who have experienced childhood trauma.
Can you give me an example, like a story of someone and what that trauma might have been in their childhood?
Sure, there are tons of examples. I'll go ahead and give mine. I'll be transparent about it. And what I'll share, it's not limited to just these events, but these are the main shapers for me. Um, First off, I was adopted. That in itself is not necessarily a traumatic experience, though people who have been adopted typically have some sort of disconnection with family, which is another little hurdle. Um, in my case, I was adopted, but prior to being born, my birth mother went through a so-called major traumatic event. I've not been able to gain any further information about it, but we can, extrapolate. Maybe it was car accident, maybe it was, an assault, maybe it could be anything like that. The mom's physical response is going to flood the body with hormones. It's going to be cortisol, adrenaline, and it's a sudden flood. Think of how you feel going through a or watching a horror movie. The bad thing pops out, your body goes into this, really uptight state, and you know why the bad thing came out and scared you. Okay, but in the womb, what happens is those hormones go straight through to the baby as well. And the baby has no visual cues, may have auditory cues, but doesn't understand them, and is getting this sudden flood of chemicals. So that was the first thing uh, that shaped my background. Um, that's been shown in studies that those hormonal experiences, early pre-memory, get hardwired into the baby, child, adult, and definitely have long lasting effects. The second is that once I was born, back when I was born, the legal process was slower with regard to adoption. So I was placed in a kind of an orphanage, basically a receiving home, where I was cared for by attendants and such, fed me, changed me, whatever I needed, but wasn't given parental love. And again, studies have shown that, particularly in the first 6 months, the absence of parental love has major impacts on the emotional health of a person later on in life, usually showing up in anxiety or depression. So, those are two examples. I had a challenging upbringing with my father, my adoptive father. Again, that was I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but those three things, in my case, shaped really how my life has been patterned since then. Other examples that people might go through, there are situations where um, children go through physical abuse or severe emotional abuse. There may be long periods of neglect. Uh, those are just some examples that people might
And they don't
see
always
in
have to
childhood.
remember it for it to be detrimental or traumatic, right?
It's almost uh, more detrimental if you can't
Really?
remember it. Yeah, because you don't know what to process.
Hmm.
So imagine you're 10 and you're mugged. Um, you, you can say, okay, bad guys wanted my stuff. They threatened me for it. I lost my stuff. That's something that you can process
Yeah.
either by yourself with a therapist or so on. But if something happened when you're 6 months old, 12 months old, you have no context for it. You have no way to process it.
Yeah, or even 2 years old. Yeah, somebody that.
Sure.
How does
Memories don't really start to show up until, I don't know, 3 to 5 years old
I can
is
remember
typical.
things back from when I was 3, but you wonder how much of it is an actual memory and how much of it you've heard about in stories.
That's so true. That's so true. I personally have, I think, two memories from when I was three, both kind of innocuous. But yeah, 3 to 5 is typically
Yeah.
when they'll start.
So how does the residual from trauma get in the way of accomplishing our goals?
It really goes back to that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mechanism. Um, I can spend hours on this. I will do my best to shoehorn it because I know we
You know
don't
what?
have that
How about if
long.
how
But
about if we approach it from this direction is how can a coach help someone get over that?
mm, okay,
Is that easier?
so that is easier, and I'll make a distinction because there is trauma coaching and trauma therapy.
Mm-hmm.
My personal belief is that both are necessary and they perform different functions. A therapist should help a person overcome the trauma and basically heal from it as best as they can. A coach is better equipped to help somebody who is working through that trauma get around it so that they can get to where they're trying to be, so that they're not stuck while they're going through therapy.
What if you have
Um,
somebody as a coach who keeps using that and I'm probably going to get booed for saying this, but everybody can find a million excuses not to complete their action steps to get to their goals. So what if how do you get them past that?
so obviously, the first step is recognition. Recognition, one, that they do want to accomplish those goals. Recognition number two, why they want to accomplish them. And three, recognition that there is some sort of barrier in the way. So otherwise, they will keep pushing forward the same way, um, finding themselves napping in the middle of the day because they, don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with naps, but because they can't cope.
They get exhausted when they think about what they have to get through, right?
Absolutely. So, from a coaching perspective, one of the things that I press on heavily is the why. Why are you wanting to accomplish what you're wanting to accomplish? And the reason I focus on the why isn't so much that you get that intrinsic motivation out of it. There's some aspect to that. So I don't find anything wrong with that. However, what I find is that a lot of people state their goals based on what people's expectations are of them. And they don't have any really emotional resonance to those goals because they really don't align with who their true self is.
That
They
makes sense.
probably also don't know who their true self is. So asking those why questions helps clarify where they actually do want to go.
Yeah, that's good. What are some immediate steps that a trauma survivor can take to improve? And what are they going to improve?
Yeah. So one immediate step that I teach anybody that I can get to listen um, is to is a calming technique. And it's very simple, but we just don't think to do it. But when you're in a situation that is causing that fight, flight, freeze, and again, I'll keep focusing on the freeze part because that's the most detrimental to those who've gone through trauma. Um, that freeze mechanism, um, when they're in an event like that, being able to habitually train themselves to take a minute, take a long breath in through the nose, hold, and out. This whole process should take 15 to 20 seconds. And if it's not 15 to 20 seconds, if it's shorter, then do it again. And then simply take one action toward whatever that stressor is. Give you an example. I mentioned I do real estate on the side and was in the middle of a deal that was falling apart. And I had received an email that had bad news about it. And I I just froze. I had no idea what I was going to do. The whole thing's falling apart. This is awful. I What's going on? So I took a second, took half a minute. I breathed in deeply. I cleared my mind. What is one thing that I could do? And I was able to come up with one thing, which led to another thing, which wasn't something that I fabricated in my brain as doom gloom scenario. This was, if I hadn't done anything, it could have completely fallen apart, financial cost, etc. And just by taking that moment to step back and breathe, breathing helps remove the freeze response, tells the body that you're not in danger, even though you may feel you are.
You felt the fear first, and that fear continued as you froze, right?
Mhm.
And then
Yeah,
taking breath.
once you're frozen,
Yeah.
yeah, once you're frozen, it it will unfreeze on its own over time, but over time usually is not helpful enough in the near term.
Yeah. What are some long-term strategies that a trauma survivor can use?
One of the things that I teach that is both short and long term is the art of creating space. And we have so many things going on in our lives in many different ways that we end up creating our own stressors. And that's kind of the worst thing for a trauma survivor. It's one thing for anybody to be in a threat situation Um, those happen occasionally, but for us to create our own barriers, that's not helpful. So I teach creating space in four different areas. One is financial, not a financial advisor, so I can only give high level frameworks about that. But imagine this: if you get a sudden bill for say $2,000 and you have no savings in the bank, and you have to pay this bill or there are severe consequences, you're not going to do too well. That's a sudden stressor. You're suddenly breathing. What's the first thing I can do, etc. And if you're doing that over and over, that's you're not healing and you're not improving. If you've created financial space, say you have an emergency account set aside, it takes time to build that. That's why it's both a short and long term solve. But if you have a $10,000 savings account for emergencies, well, it's a bummer you're having to pay this extra $2,000, but it's no longer a fear inspiring scenario. So that's one is money. The second is time. So I would say we in our Western culture are used to living busyness to busyness to busyness. And that does a couple things. One, it doesn't allow us time to take take out for self-care. Doesn't allow us to spend time in meditation. It has us rushing. Um, so we are chronically in this, I don't know, alert state where we're having to think through, okay, what's happening next? What's happening next? So that you don't drop a ball time wise. So by carving out either time between meetings, maybe it's even having 5 or 10 minutes between meetings, carving out blocked time where you can work on whatever creative endeavors you want to or need to do, whether that's 1 to 4 hours, maybe a whole day. Um, and again, this is short and long term. You may not be able to carve out 4 hours in a day right now, and there may be steps to get there. So the third one is mental. If you have way too much to think about, you it's hard to think about anything. So you're focusing on one area, but you have this other thing that also needs to get done. It creeps in. We aren't good at multitasking. We like to think we are, and maybe we can multitask, but but we can't multi-focus. One thing's going to get our focus, and the other is going to get short shrift. And usually, both things get substandard results. And then the last thing is emotional. So, which kind of seems recursive, but there are ways that we can actually create emotional space within ourselves. Part of it is through doing things like meditation, taking time to um, allow our emotional state to drop to a calmer space. And there's also removing things that may not be a trigger from a time, mental, or money perspective, but can be emotionally draining, specific people or scenarios.
You do those four things and everybody's life would be easier, wouldn't it?
Yes. Now imagine if everybody did all of those things. Imagine the calmness that we would have in our world. That's what everybody wants, right? World peace.
You wouldn't have so many cranky people at Walmart.
Yeah,
On the
very
road, you
true.
have all the road rage. Yeah. Those are
Yeah,
four good steps, four good things to do just to um, put your life in a place that you can handle stressors, right?
yeah,
Yeah, those are
yep.
good. Okay, so you have a free assessment of the degree to which past trauma is impacting the the person who's taking the test's ability to accomplish their goals or have fulfillment. That'll be interesting. And you have a text, you got a 33777 and just type in the word assessment and there's two S's twice in that. In case
That's
you
correct.
don't know how to spell it. The assessment, type that word in and then you'll get the assessment test, right?
That's right.
We'll put that
Yeah,
underneath
it's
show notes too. That's great. I bet that's interesting.
it is, and I found it even revealing creating the assessment. But it's yeah, it's looking at where, did you have developmental trauma? And I'm using that term loosely. To what degree is it impacting your goals? And to what degree is that trauma relevant in your life?
Does somebody
Um,
have to remember the trauma to be able to realize that they have developmental trauma in your assessment?
so that's a really good question. With the assessment, looking at usually it's looking at the actual events, but I also include questions that might hint at potential unremembered developmental trauma. I want to be cautious with that because there's a lot of ways that people can have false memories.
Mhm.
And at the same time, there's a lot of situations that, as we pointed out earlier, you don't remember because we just don't have memories from that far back or it's repressed. So I want to be cautious with that area.
I think I have a false memory about a big cat.
Oh, that's funny.
But I do understand that I used to climb up on the roof at the age of 2, so I might have had a big
Wow,
cat
that's an
up there.
accomplishment.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
great. I don't have
thank you.
anything like that.
Yeah, don't you? That's good. Thank you so much for being here today. This is very interesting. You've got a lot of great tips, and I know most of our listeners are health coaches and people in the wellness field. So the things that you've said, I think, are very helpful, and I love the 4 different things to do. Um, in advance, maybe take longer term to set it up. I think that that would make a difference for everybody. That's huge. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend. Oh, I
All
guess
right.
we're
Thank
only
you.
halfway through the week, aren't we? Have a good week.
That's
Have a
right.
good rest of the week.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.